So now we're going to take the wheel off. So the first thing you have to do is you have to remove the fender. Real easy. It's a 6mm bolt in here. You have 2 bolts, one here and there, and same thing on the other side. On the back of this, now there's a nut. So if you're trying to take that bolt out and it's not coming out, there's a nut on the back. The nut's a 13mm. So I have a box end wrench, ratcheting box end, so if it's a little bit easier, you can just put it back there and then just unbolt this. Now you won't be using these bolts again. In the fender kit that we give you, they come with bolts. Now the one thing I do, I leave the bolts kind of in the, I still leave them in there, just kind of helps hold it while you go to the other side. The nut's off, but you can do that. So it's real simple, you just do the exact same thing on the other side. With that box end wrench, you just put it on there and it's real easy. You don't even have to mess with it. Okay, so that's all there is to that. Everything's unbolted. Now you just take the bolts out. Now if the bolts are stuck inside there, you really can't get your finger in there to pull them out. So I just take the socket and you just put it in there and you just kind of put a little sideways pressure on it. Kind of get it going. And you can pull the bolt right out. But that's kind of the trick. Just kind of hold it and then kind of cock it a little bit and it'll come right out. And like I say, you won't reuse those bolts. And then you just pull the fender out, just kind of rotate it towards the front. Take the fender out, so that's easy. Now the next thing you're going to want to do is, we have the bike jacked up, so you don't have to do all those steps jacked up, but now you're at the point where you need to jack it up. So what we're going to do, we're going to take both calipers off. What you do to take the calipers off is you want to take the mounting bolts here and here out. You don't want to mess with these bolts. A lot of guys try to take this off thinking that's going to do the caliper. That's not. Don't mess with that. Do these ones. So those are 8mm Allen bolt. And when you take this off, no brake fluid comes out or anything like that. You're just simply unbolting the caliper from the lower fork mount. Once you get the bolt out, the caliper will just slide right off. Okay, so you can kind of set that up out of the way. Nothing leaks out of it, nothing. So you're just going to do the exact same thing on the other side. And like I say, this isn't really that hard of a job. It just takes a little bit to get everything unbolted, but you can see it's nothing fancy. You guys can do this yourself. Just pull it right off. Kind of set it up out of the way. Now, everything's off for the brake system. So now it's time to take the wheel out. So what you're going to want to do, first thing you have to do is you have these axle pinch bolts right here. You have 2 on this side. Some bikes have 2 here and 2 on the other side. On these, you just have the 2 here. So that's a 6mm Allen. So you're basically just alternating between sockets. So you don't have to take these all the way out. You can just loosen them up. Because what that does is, if you see this crack right here, that squeezes that together and tightens it up on the axle. So the axle on this bike is a 16 millimeter. Some are 14. This one's a 16. If you don't have a 16, a 5/8 Allen works. So you're just going to want to take that and loosen that up. Now, what you're going to want to do, this is the end of the axle, so it's actually, you know, whatever, 10-12 inches long. So you're going to loosen that up and you'll see it start coming out. And then it hits a spot where it doesn't come out anymore. Okay, that's how you know that you're all the way out. Because you'll sit there and you'll keep spinning and you'll be like, oh, it's not coming. Well, it's not coming because it's already done. Okay, so right there, we're loose. I'll try to show you. I can pull this out. This is a brand new bike, so this will come out real easy. If your bike has some miles on it, you might have some corrosion in there. It might be a little bit harder to get out. If it is, you just go on the other side and you take like a punch or a block of wood and you just kind of tap it with a dead blow hammer, a rubber hammer, kind of tap it out. So this, I just grab that. So you're going to want to pull the axle out, and the other thing you got to hold is your wheel, because your wheel's going to cock funny once you get it out. So you want to kind of get the weight off of it and find that sweet spot where that pulls right out. Okay. And this wasn't, we didn't do this bike and loosen everything up first. This is actually taking it apart. So you'll see, if it's a newer bike, it'll come out just like that. Thing you have to be careful is you have a spacer on each side. So you want to take your spacer out right here, and you want to set it on the side of the bike, you know, so you don't lose them. You have one on the other side. Just pull it out. And I'll show you, they are different size. Okay, so one's a little bigger. The bigger side goes on the side with the ABS. If you don't have ABS, it still goes on that side, but the bigger one goes on the left side of the bike. So set those down so that you don't have them, you don't want to mix them up. If you're doing the job and you're going to put the new wheel right in, you're okay. If you're going to come back in a week, you might want to label those, put them in a bag and label them so that you don't lose it. So now that the wheel's off, the next thing you're going to want to do is you want to take the brake rotor off. You have the brake rotor here, and on this side you have the brake rotor, but on this particular bike you have the ABS ring. When you change to a bigger wheel, you need to get a bigger ABS ring that we offer on the website. If you do a 21-inch wheel, you need a 21-inch ABS ring. A 23 requires a 23, and a 26, so on and so forth, up to 30. You have to put this back on, but you cannot put the stock one on. If you put the stock one on, you're going to have problems. The ABS light's going to be on, it's not going to work right. So you want to make sure you take that off. The other thing is, if your bike has some miles on it, you want to make sure you keep the brake rotors on the correct sides. So in the bike like this, you want to make sure you keep this brake rotor on the same side, because what happens is your pads will wear and they'll get certain characteristics, the lines and all that wear into this rotor. You don't want to flop them side to side. You want to keep everything the same. So this is really pretty easy to do. You're going to take these bolts out. They're 10 millimeter socket bolts. And these are Loctited in, so they're fairly tight. And when you take stuff apart like this, where you have a lot in a circle, and if you watch my videos I show you, do it in a crisscross pattern. You don't want to start here, 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 here. You want to crisscross. That way you don't warp anything. And I just go around and break them loose. Okay, and now that they're all loose, you can see the rotor's a little loose now. Just go and take these out. Like I say, they're Loctited in, so they're in a little tighter. And you'll be using these bolts over, so make sure you don't lose them. If you're putting a chrome wheel on, and you're putting one of our fancy rotors on, or even if you're putting the stock rotor back on, we offer chrome bolts for this that really dress this up. If you don't want these kind, we do offer those for you chrome guys. Okay, so you take the rotor off, it just lifts right off, and you want to set that, like I said before, set that on the side that it came off of. I'm just going to do the same thing on this side. Everybody gets scared of that ABS ring. It really doesn't do anything. You know, nothing falls apart. You don't have to do anything special, just unbolt it. Same thing, crisscross pattern. And I'll show you, you can take the ring off. There's only 3 bolts holding it on out of the 6. So I'll show you, you take that off. Okay, and the ABS ring comes off. I give you a quick little spiel here on how the ABS works. What you have is this is called a tone ring or a pulse ring. You have a sensor in your fork, and the sensor kind of works like this. You have the sensor here, and it's got a magnet in the end of the sensor. It gets real close here. When this spins, you get a wave pattern. If you had a scope, you get a wave pattern where you have a signal and you have none, and you have them and you have none in between these teeth. What that does is when this goes past, it creates a magnetic field, gives you a signal when when the metal passes there. That signal is relayed back to the computer, and the computer knows how many times your wheel spins, and it figures out for a certain distance the wheel should spin so many revolutions. It figures all that out, and through algorithms it makes the anti-lock brakes work. So when you hit the brakes really quick, it figures out that in a certain distance for the speed you're going, you're slowing down way too fast, so it turns the anti-lock brakes on. And what they do is a whole bunch of times in a second they pulse on off, so they're going like this to hold your brakes. That's why if you notice in a car and you're on ice and you hit your brakes, you feel that your brake pedal vibrating. That's what it's doing. The anti-lock brakes are working. People think that they're not working. That's what they do. They go on and off a whole bunch of times in a second, and that grabs and releases and grabs and releases your braking system so you don't skid. And the computer figures all that out, and it starts right here. If you have problems with your ABS, one of the first things you want to check is a broken ring, because this is easy stuff to check. This ring can get cracked, and if it cracks, that'll send the ABS light on. Sometimes, not so much on motorcycles, but in the car world, when you have your sensor, you can get junk built up on here, rust. For some reason, if your brakes went bad and you had metal shavings, metal filings from the brakes, it'll build up on here, and if the clearance between here and this sensor isn't right, it'll trip the light and make the light come on. So it's just something simple you can check, but make sure that's clean. So then you're just going to keep taking off the other 3 bolts. That's my speech on ABS. That's basically how it works. So you're going to take off the other bolts and do the same thing. Take the rotor off. Okay, you're going to put it on the side you did. Now you're done with this wheel. So the next thing we got to do is get the handlebars off. Now this is a little bit more, you have to be careful. Not hard once again, but a lot of stuff. You have your risers here. You got to loosen these up. That will let the handlebars flop around. You also have to get the controls off both sides, to get those off. We'll show you that. It's pretty easy, just a couple steps. You kind of got to do it, first. One thing you're going to want to do is you have your zip ties here holding your cables to your handlebars. You want to just take a wire cutter and snip those. Kind of get that stuff freed up a little bit. Do it on both sides. And again, just take your time. You don't want to cut through your cables. So that gets that stuff, like I say, out of the way a little bit, so that when you do take this control off, you don't have to monkey with the handlebars. You can just, you know, pull it right out of the way. So if you have cruise control, stereo type stuff, you almost have to get these switches here and loosen them up a little bit just so you can get the screws. You have the two bolts rather, that hold on the perch, the clutch perch. You also have the same thing on the brake side. You take that off, and then you're going to be left with the grip, and you're going to be left with the control housing. Now the one thing with the grips, if you have heated grips, you have to disconnect all that, but these grips don't really come off very easily. You can do a hair dryer and a heat gun and all that, and they're glued on, and twist them and work them off, and you can do that. The ends here pull out. What most people do, they just take a razor blade and slice it right there and pull that off. Now that's one way of doing it. You really don't have to do any of that to get this off. I'm just kind of telling you. So you want to take a 6mm here and loosen these bolts up that hold the perch on. Sometimes you can get this with a socket. On this deal, I prefer an Allen wrench because it's a little bit easier to get in there. You have two bolts, like I say, and it just kind of makes that a clamp. Loosen them up. See, now that loosens up. That's also how you adjust your lever. If your lever was down too far and you were trying to squeeze it and you couldn't reach it, you can twist it up and just tighten it back up. That's how you do that. No big deal. The one thing you have to be careful of is there is a wire on this. For the clutch switch here, there's a wire underneath there. And I'll try to show you here. It's probably a little bit hard to see. But underneath here, there's a connector right here. And you have to get the little end of that connector and pull it down. And you just disconnect it, okay? So you want to make sure you do that before you tear all this off, because you don't want to be pulling on the wires. You could risk breaking the wires. Another good tip for you is on the gas tank here, you see we have a cover. This is a cover we sell. It's a padded cover. You can also use a bath towel or something, but you want to put something on the cover just so if you drop the wrench or you drop a bolt, you don't ding up your gas tank. A couple minutes of prevention just to do that can save you in the long run. So basically you just take those bolts out. Okay, and that'll come right off, and since we already have the cables unhooked from the zip ties on the handlebar, that'll come right out of the way. Just let that sit, and there's your clamp. Now if you just kind of hold it in the same place and just screw it back on, that way you know exactly how it goes. You don't lose the bolts, so if you get sidetracked or something, you forget. Just do that, and you can just let that hang on the side. Now, there's a bolt right here going up in, and there's a bolt on the other side going up in. We can get to this one pretty easy. It's a Phillips head. So you're just going to loosen that up. Okay, when you loosen that up, that also allows this to, you can see it starts to get that loose. Now this one, sometimes you can get it with the Phillips and sometimes you can't. Your switch housing or your control here might be in the way. So all you do is you got two Phillips screws here, and I recommend doing this. You can fight, you know, I can get that screwdriver in there and I can get it to work, but it's not worth it. Just loosen these up. Take these screws out. Okay, and now this bracket will move out of the way, and again, it's got wires and stuff on it, so be careful. You don't want to start pulling stuff and tearing wires. You just have to get it out of the way enough so that you can get this bolt right here. So now my screwdriver will go right up in there. Just loosen that. And the screw comes right out. And then just do the same on the other side. Okay, now this you just kind of spread it apart. Just kind of pull it off and it'll come loose. So now that you have this apart, there's another zip tie here. You want to cut that zip tie off, and again, it's real small, so be careful you don't cut your wires. Okay, that'll allow you to kind of separate that a little bit. You just want to kind of be careful and get that off. So there, now that's off. Okay, so what you want to do now is if you can kind of finagle this out of there, there you go. This will come out of the way now. Just kind of set that aside. And this, what you can do is when you get your grip off, now I'm not going to cut this apart and ruin the guy's grip on this particular bike, but you get this off, this will slide right off. That's how you have to do it. The other way, what you can do right now is you can take this screws off the back of this thing. And just pull your switch off so your bracket's the only thing hanging on there. So you can take the bars off and work on them on the bench. You want to put your screws back in there, these little ones, so you don't lose them. And if you're switching out the chrome, these housings in chrome, it's the same thing. You just do that. We already have it disconnected. So you're just going to kind of set it to the side, and you basically have this side all done. So we'll come and we'll show you how to do the other side. Okay, to get this end off, this is just a pressed in part. So what you have to do is I put a rag around it. If you're not worried about it, you don't want to reuse it, you can just twist it right out of there. Some of these are black, some of them are chrome. But I just put a rag around there. And I get it and hold it real tight. If you slip with the pliers, you're going to chew it up. Just kind of start working it back and forth. Alright, I hate the rag, and we're not reusing these on this bike. So you just get that and twist it and pull it out. It's just pressed in with a little glue. So it'll come out. You can see the glue on there. That'll come out. So now what a lot of guys do, if you're not going to reuse the grips, you just, like I said, slice that. This bracket will come right off. You get it off. Make sure when you look at it, you look at the way it's on there. Because if you put this on and you flip it the other way and put it on, and then you get everything bolted up and you go to slide this on, you're going to say, damn, I put it the wrong way. Make sure you look at how this is going so you don't put it on backwards. The last thing I'll show you, and this is really only if you're reusing your bars, this little fitting right here, this is where the zip ties go. Let me grab a zip tie and I'll show you how that works. It's a special fitting that presses into the bar, and it has a slot in there. So you would just take your zip tie, put your zip tie through it, and that's how you would put your cables back on the bike. Now, if you don't want to take your grip off and ruin your grip, cut it apart, the one thing you can do is I take a pair of side cutters and I get right next to the bar, but I don't cut it. I just use it like a pair of pliers. And you do it like leverage. I just kind of put it in there and squeeze just enough to hold it, and then just pry and work it down. You don't want to keep pulling it. You want to keep grabbing another bite and pull it down a little bit more, and another bite. And if you're careful, it's not perfect, but you will be able to reuse that. Okay, you get it out, and you can see all the little teeth on there. That's what holds it in there. So if you rip it out of there, you're going to rip all those teeth off. And if you squeeze too hard, you cut it, and then you're screwed. You can't reuse it. So that's what that is. So to put it back in, you just put it in, and you press it in there. Just put it in there, and it'll stay. Okay, so again, you just kind of grab it, and just kind of work it, and pull it right out. Now this bracket can go down around, and you may be able to get it around. I don't know, I've never tried it, but at least that's one way you can reuse these as well. So we'll go on the other side and we'll show you how to do the throttle side. It's basically exactly the same thing that we did on that side. We already cut our cables loose, It's a little more intimidating because you have the throttle cables, you have the brakes, you have all that stuff. Same idea. We got another zip tie here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is the clamp here. And this stuff on this side is just a little more compact in there. Again, I don't know if in my other videos you watched, but I showed you how the end of this wrench has a ball on it. If you look at that one, it's kind of rounded. That end's straight. What that does is it's called a wobble. And when you put it in there, it lets you go on angles, and it still takes the bolt out. So if you're looking at a set of these, Harbor Freight or Craftsman or something, make sure you, if they have the option, make sure you get the one that has that wobble, because if you look, you can see how the bolt will wobble on there. Where if you go on this way, it really doesn't wobble. It only kind of sits in the one spot. So that definitely helps you in some of these tight areas to get that out. Now on this side, you can't really get up in there. Okay, that's why I say you kind of got to do some of this in order. You can't get up in there. You have to take this bracket off first, and you kind of just go back and forth with some of this stuff. So take those screws out. Same way we did on the other side. And some of this, like I say, is just, it's not a certain order, it's just to gain access to some of these screws. Makes it a little bit easier. You can move this around now a little bit. And the same thing under here, if you can see it. I'll try to point with the screwdriver, but underneath here you have the wires that go onto your brake switch. This is the switch that when you hit your brakes, it turns your brake light on. You want to make sure you watch which one's on which. You don't want to mix, there's two wires, you don't want to cross them up when you put it back together. So take a picture of it, write it down, whatever, and you just slide these off, and they're real delicate, so you gotta be kind of careful. Just slide them right off. They're just a regular terminal. You almost need a little smaller screwdriver, but almost got it. Okay. So there, you can see the wires. It's just a regular blade type terminal with a little boot on it, but they have a little grease on them so they're slippery to get to. So now you have to try to get some of that out of there. And now you can kind of get in there a little bit easier. It's hard to see in the dark, but you can kind of get in there a little bit to get that last clamp bolt right here. You can see I'm on it now. You get some of that wiring out of the way. It's just a little bit easier. And you'll see when you're doing it. I know it's hard to see with the camera, but you'll see when you're doing it. You can either get to it or you can't. Same thing there. Just take that bolt off. Now your master cylinder is free. You can just kind of hang that down. Now the one thing you might want to do is just wrap a rag around here, you know, put it in a bag or something, just so if it happens to leak on you, you don't get the brake fluid leaking on your paint, because that will screw up your paint. Same thing, take the clamp off. Just stuck on there. Take the clamp off. Put it back on the master cylinder so you don't lose it. And you can see now, this is upside down, but where the wires go, right there, you can see how when all that's running under there with the cables and everything, how that's kind of hard to get to. It's a little easier to see it now that it's upside down, but that's what you're working on. So when it's like that, that's the wires, and that's where those went onto. Okay, so we have that out of the way. Now we have this cable thing loose, because we already took the screws out of that. Now we're just going to take the housing loose, just like we did the other one. And you can kind of finagle this out of the way. You got to kind of watch your cable adjusters down here. Just enough to get it out of the way. Now there's two screws here. You want to get the one that's up in a little farther. You can see when you loosen it, it's split the housing right here. It's starting to come apart, so you know you're on the right one. Plus this is a really long screw. It's a pretty long one. And you're going to want to do the one in the front here. And again, since we already loosened this, I can move this all around so that I can get the screwdriver right in there. And I'll show you that screw that I just took out in the back is the longer of the two. So make sure when you're doing that you kind of remember which way those go. The longer one goes in the back. Okay, so now this is all apart, so you just kind of lift that off. It's the same as the other side. Just kind of jiggle that. And now you got your throttle cables in here. Okay, you can see the one here and the one there. What you can do is your adjusters. These are your adjusters. I'll try to get this out of the way so you can see it, but down here are your adjusters. You can loosen those up. The one is just a lock nut and the other one's the actual adjuster. You can loosen those so that the cable will come out. And this is one thing people always are freaked out about, is these cables, where do they go and all that. Just kind of keep them straight. They're not hard to figure out. And on these bikes they kind of really only go one way. But if you screw this adjuster in, that'll give you a little bit of slop. And if you're changing your bars or your grips, you're going to have to readjust all this anyway, so don't panic. We'll show you how to do that. But you get a little bit of slop. You can see this is slop in it now. And what I do, I'll try to get a tool so I can show you. All you have to do is just kind of reach under this cable and lift it up. And what it is, it's on this barrel here in this slot. Just kind of lift it up, rotate it a little bit so that that cable comes over the hump. If you can see that, I'm trying to do it in a steps, but so you can see that cable comes out, and then the cable comes over that hump. Then you just push the barrel right out. Okay, so that's that side, and you just do the same thing on the other side, just like that. So it's loose now. Everything's loose. And again, you kind of think it's not ready to come off because it won't. It's just because all this stuff is still so intertwined in here. So there's two more screws right here. You can take those off. And again, if your bike doesn't have this control for the cruise, it's a little bit easier because that stuff's not in the way. But you just take those screws off. And there, that'll drop that bracket out of the way, so that'll help you. Okay, so that takes that right out of the way. And again, put your screws back in so you don't lose them. They're almost all the same type screws. So you really can't get them screwed up, but this way just helps you. Remember, so that takes that off. And now you can see when I took that off, this practically falls out of the way now. Everything's out of the way, so you just kind of unhook everything, and there's your throttles. That's why on the bottom, when I showed you how to take this off, I said make sure you take that screw. If you take this screw out, when it's under there, if you take that screw out, that takes the bottom of the housing off, which isn't any big deal, but you could cross up the cables. This way the cables are in the same spot. You don't have to figure anything out. It's already there. So you just kind of do that. Now the one thing I'll show you here, in the handlebars, in stock handlebars, they have this little hole here, and it's on both sides. It's a little locking hole. And what you have in your switch housing is you have this tit right here, okay? That little tit goes right in that hole, and that's what locks it on there. Okay, so even if you're not changing your handlebars, if you just don't like the position of this and you want this rotated this way or rotated back for your preference, you can't do it because of that hole that locks it in. All you need to do is you take a little grinder or a file, a Dremel, and just grind that little tit down. Get rid of that little tit. Then when you put this on, you can now swivel it wherever you want. So that's a good tip for you. Even if you're not doing handlebars, you can still do that. When you put the bolts in, tighten them up, it'll still hold it plenty tight, so you don't have to worry about that. Some bars I've seen have holes in different spots. I can't remember if it's a Vision or which bar it was, maybe a Highball. You have a hole in a different spot. That's so if you rotate the handlebars up, if you were to bring your handlebars way forward, this thing would be like this. So you would take it off, you'd rotate it, put it in the other hole and do it. That just is a pain. So just grind that tit off and put it back on and you'll be fine. And as far as I know, most aftermarket handlebars don't have this hole in there, because that's the point, is you can adjust it where you want it, and they don't even come with that hole, so you have to grind that out. So now your bracket's loose, your throttle's loose, it's not glued on, but you have the same deal on the end. You want to grab this and just twist it out, okay? And then your throttle will slide right off and your bracket will slide right off. Now, like I said, the same with the other side. Make sure you know which way this bracket is, because you can just see how much work that was to get all this stuff off. If you take this and you put this bracket on this way, you start getting everything hooked up and you go to bolt it on, it's kind of one of the last things you do, and you're like, damn, it's going the wrong way. You have to take everything back off, redo your throttle cables. So just make sure you either leave it on the bars until you go to the last thing and switch it out, or just take a marker and draw an arrow, take a picture with your cell phone, whatever you want to do. Just make sure you get that bracket on, because that's where people screw up, and then it's a real pain in the butt. Okay, so everything's off now on the bars. So the next thing to do is loosen the bars themselves on the triple tree bolts. It's a 6mm bolt. Now you see I have 2 bolts on the top, and there's also 2 bolts on the back side up from underneath. What that is for is you can't really adjust the bars right now. When you put new bars on or put these back on, you're not really sure where they are. Well, once you get your fairing bolted back on and you sit on the bike and you get everything where you want it, you can't get to these 2 bolts. Okay, they're under the fairing. You can't get to them. So what you do is you get these bolts pretty tight and you leave the back 2 here loose, and then when the fairing's on the bike, you can go from underneath here and you can tighten those up. So they're not completely tight, so you can still rotate the bars where you want them. Once you get them right where you want them and fine tune them, tighten these up and you're good to go, because these are all ready. Now, these are really pretty tight. Obviously, you want them to be pretty tight for your handlebars. Now, this is another deal where I've seen guys do it a million times. When you loosen these up, the handlebars will drop and smack the gas tank. So make sure you got your arm under there. Make sure you're doing something. Have somebody hold it for you. Put you know, put that towel on the gas tank. And if you can't get to these, everybody forgets, this still turns. So if you can't get to this bolt, just turn the handlebars. And I'll admit, these ones under here are a pain. See how that rotated down? As soon as I loosened it, that rotated down, but I was kind of holding it. So that's what you want to be careful, so you don't whack your gas tank. This one seems to be really in there. Still tight. They do have some Loctite on them, I think, so sometimes they're hard all the way coming out. And leave at least one bolt in there while you're doing this, so it helps to hold that in place. If not, it'd be flopping all over. Wow, this one's tight all the way to the end. Okay, you can see that, all that Loctite on that bolt. Okay, all that, I don't know if you can see the powdery stuff coming off. That's the sealer. So when you put this back together, you want to make sure you wire brush that, get that junk off of there, so that when you put the fresh on, it doesn't interfere with it. So now you can just take these off, the little caps just come off. You don't have to, but you want to kind of keep them on the same side that they came off of. It's just a good idea. Now hold the bars so that they don't fall. Take that cap off. And you've just removed a set of handlebars on a Victory, crossroads, cross country. It's that easy. A lot of work, but it's not hard. It's just time consuming. So that now takes the bars off.